Good morning. What a beautiful sunshiny day. I hope that you'll come to church and Sunday school today, but right now we're going to have a little preview for Sunday school. So if you're thinking about getting up, get out of that bed, get ready, get up there to church because it will renew your soul to be there with other like Christians with like faith. Okay, today, Matthew 17, 9 through 13 is what we're going to be talking about. And if you recall last week, we started on Matthew 17 and we had the transfiguration. When Jesus went up on the mountain, he was transfigured into a bright and shining being. He was visiting with Moses and Elijah. He took 3 of his disciples with him, Peter, James, and John, and it was an incredible mountaintop experience. It was so awesome that, Peter just wanted to build tabernacles up there and just stay up there. It was an amazing thing. Now, this week, here's what's going to happen. I want to just ask you to think about life for a minute. And, often in our lives, when we have that awesome, amazing mountaintop experience that we don't want to come down from, all of a sudden, you're going to find out that as you have to, maybe you've been on an incredible trip and maybe it's just been so awesome and you've just enjoyed everything, the scenery, your family, the place you stayed. It was incredible. But, we have to come down off that mountaintop at some point and we have to get back into the real world. Well, this is what's going to happen here in Matthew 17, 9 through 13. And the enemy, sometimes when you come back from that mountaintop experience, that enemy is going to be waiting at the bottom of the hill. And, this is what Satan does. He's just got this honed down to a fine art where he can steal the seed of truth that's been put into your heart. Often we say to people who have just decided they've made a decision for Christ and they've decided to come to him, they've decided to confess their sins and to confess their faith in Jesus Christ. And, and they'll be immersed in baptism. And then we often warn them, now be ready. That was your mountaintop experience. You just feel so justified in the eyes of God. And then the first thing that's going to happen is Satan's going to say, well, I want that person back. I want to mess up that situation. So many times that happens. Well, here's what's going to happen to Jesus in Matthew 17. Let's just go ahead and read 9 through 13. Beginning in verse 9, as they went back down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, now don't tell anyone what you have seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. And of course, his disciples that are with him, I think they spend a lot of time in confusion because they're thinking, we've been told through prophecy that Elijah's going to come back before the end. And so they're really confused about that. And so they're thinking, well, why wouldn't we tell people that Elijah was up there on the mountain? Because that's been prophesied. But Jesus is saying, don't tell anyone what you've seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. And then the disciples ask him, why do the teachers of religious law insist that Elijah must return before the Messiah comes? Jesus replied, this is very odd, so be sure and get this. Elijah is indeed coming first to get everything ready. Oh, wait a minute. Who's that sound like? Somebody that came first before Christ to get everything ready? Okay, but I tell you, this is in verse 12, Elijah has already come, but he wasn't recognized, and they chose to abuse him. And in the same way, they will also make the Son of Man suffer. Then the disciples realized he was talking about John the Baptist. Do you recall that John the Baptist was referred to as Elijah? That he had similarities to Elijah. He wasn't Elijah, but yet he did have similarities to Elijah. And so this is what Jesus is talking about, and the disciples actually figure it out. Okay, so that was 7 through 13. Now, Jesus corrects their thinking. This is going to be the commentary. Jesus must have time to be assured that man knew who and what the Messiah was. Why did he come? He must have that time so he doesn't need his disciples out there talking about it. Their whole concept, both of the forerunner and the Messiah, had to be radically and fundamentally changed before they could start talking about it. The Jews expected the Messiah to be a conquering hero. You know, I've talked about this so many times. Their expectation was that he's going to come back and he's going to get their land back for them. The land of Israel is going to be theirs again because he's going to take it back from Rome. To throw off the Roman yoke, to restore their national power. But verse 12 corrects their thinking. Jesus has clearly said that the way to God's service is not to annihilate the enemy, but to show them sacrificial love. It has been computed that in the century previous to the crucifixion, that no fewer than 200,000 Jews lost their lives in futile and useless rebellion against the Romans. Now, you know, we've talked about that too. That's in that period between the Old and the New Testament, the 400 years in there where the Maccabees rose up and they tried to defeat the Romans. And of course, you know, it became a futile effort because God didn't tell them to do it. They just decided that it needed to be done. And while it was a valiant thing to do for Christ, or for, at that time for the Israelite people, for the Jewish people, it was not something that was commanded. So in fact, you know, it just became a useless, futile rebellion against Rome. Before these men could preach Christ, they must know who and what Jesus Christ was, what he stood for. And until his followers knew the necessity of the cross, on why he had to go to the cross, they had to be silent and to learn. Okay, let's move on. Now, this is going to be verses 14 through 20. Jesus heals a demon-possessed boy. Now, here we go. We're at the foot of the mountain now, and a large crowd was waiting for them. A man came, and he knelt before God, and he said, "Lord, have mercy on my son. He has seizures, and he suffers terribly. He often falls into the fire or into the water. So I brought him to your disciples, but they couldn't heal him." Jesus said, "You faithless and corrupt people, how long must I be with you? How long must I put up with you? Bring the boy here to me." This is verse 18. Now, I want to remind you of something that I think is important right there before I go on to verse 18. Do you remember when we studied Matthew 10 in verse 1 that Jesus gave his 12 disciples the authority over unclean spirits? And he said that they could cast them out, that they could heal every kind of disease, but yet he's got the 3 with him on top of the mountain, but he's got the others that are down below waiting for him to come back down off the mountain of transfiguration. And this man has come to them and he said, "I need for you to heal my son." And they can't do it. Okay, they've been given the authority, right, by Jesus. This is in Matthew 10, but they can't do it. Now, this is verse 18. After he said, "Bring the boy to me," then Jesus rebuked the demon in the boy, and it left him. From that moment, the boy was well. Now, we get some other insight when we read Mark and Luke. But right here in Matthew, he just says, from that moment, the boy was well. Afterward, the disciples asked Jesus privately, "Why couldn't we cast out the demon. Jesus answers to them in verse 20. You don't have enough faith, Jesus told them. I tell you the truth. If you had faith, even as small as a mustard seed, you could say to this mountain, remember they just came off a very high mountain, move from here to there, and it would move. In other words, nothing is impossible. With God, all things are possible. That's in Scripture. And so what he's saying is, I don't think he's talking so much about the mustard seed and about the side. I mean, if you're sitting there trying to evaluate if you have as much faith as a mustard seed, I think Jesus is saying little is much when God is in it. I think he's saying to them, you just don't have enough faith, guys. And that's a terrible thing. They've been with Jesus 2.5 years. And Jesus is saying to them, you didn't have enough faith to heal this child. Let's look at the commentary. Matthew 17:14-20. To go from the glory on top of the mountain back down to the devils. Now we know as long as we're on this earth, we're going to have those really high, wonderful experiences, and we're going to have some really low, terrible experiences. That's life. But when we walk through that valley, this is something that was said last week when we were in regular class that I thought was so insightful. When we were talking about going through the valley to get to the mountaintop, and the things that we had to go through in life that are the things that, are hurtful, and they're sad, and they're harmful, and they're evil, and the things that we try to take our trek around in order to get to a higher plane. But what we also learned last week was that it's not on the mountaintop where we gain the wisdom. It's not on the mountaintop where we have the experiences that really teach us about life and how to help other people. And one of the participants in class, it was so insightful, said, well, I always think about it, the mountaintop experience, as being like, the fruit. Now, we're talking about fruits of the Spirit now, but we're also talking about a literal fruit tree. She said, fruit can't grow. A fruit tree cannot grow on the mountain. Fruit trees grow in the valley. And so as you go through the lowly, wicked, hurtful, harmful valley of life, that's where the fruit grows. And either you get to a point where you grow your faith and you have enough faith to say, I believe that God is with me. I believe he's going to get me through this. I believe and I trust in him. I love him. And even though I'm walking through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. What a beautiful thing. What a beautiful thought when we go through the things in life that hurt us and harm us. Guys, and he talked about the faith of a mustard seed. And how tiny is that? I have on my little mustard seed necklace. I don't even know if you can see the mustard seed inside of it because it's so tiny. But when you look at the mustard seed, just remember that when God is in it, it doesn't matter how tiny it is. It's much when God is in it. And when you trust him and you believe in him, you have faith in him. I want you to think about right here, when Jesus is talking to this man about his son, and when we discovered the disciples can't help him, the ones that are left back down on the bottom of the mountain, they can't help him because they don't have enough faith, and Jesus has said that. Then, no sooner had Jesus come down from this heavenly glory, this Mount of Transfiguration, than he was to confront, he has this confrontation with more earthly problems and more earthly demands. King James uses the word lunatic. for this child. So if you're reading King James Version, it's going to say lunatic. And of course, that means moonstruck, or in that time, it was another way of saying that the boy was under the influence of evil spirits. And I'll just tell you one more time that in Matthew 10, that those disciples had been given this ability to drive out evil spirits, but that's what was wrong with the boy, and that he was epileptic. And we know that now, but that's not how it was written. Note that one strong, stern word that Jesus said, he bade the demon to be gone, and the boy was cured. Let's consider: 1, we are moved by faith of the Father. Even though the disciples had been given power to cast out the demons, Matthew 10:1, yet here they have failed. Okay, I think probably what I need to point out right now is even the disciples failed. We're going to fail in life. We're going to fail to have enough faith sometimes. But guys, instead of turning our backs on it and saying, well, that didn't work, he didn't hear that prayer, he doesn't care enough about me, we need to be thinking about how we can become more faithful, how we can grow our faith. I want you to think about right here, to just consider the constant demands that are made on Jesus. From hearing the voice of God while he's on the mountain, and now he hears the voice of a human crying out for his son. And it's kind of like we talked about when we did we had a lesson, we talked about the Syrophoenician woman and how she begged for her daughter. This is demons to be cast out. She begged for her, even though Jesus said, basically, do I give this? Do I throw the breadcrumbs? Do I throw the bread to the dogs, to the little dogs? And she just very quickly turned around and said, even the little dogs can have the scraps or the crumbs from the master's table. So her faith was so great. If we could have the faith of that Syrophoenician woman, which is much greater, apparently, than the faith that these disciples had at the time. Sometimes when we ask for something, and it doesn't turn out exactly that way, instead of thinking, well, God just doesn't love me, he didn't hear me. Sometimes, and let's look at 1 John 5:14-15. He's going to tell us that you can ask for things, but if it's not according to God's will, it's not going to happen. And just because you have faith and you ask, if it's not according to God's will, it's not going to happen. But this is something I've learned in my life on this earth. Sometimes what looks like it's the right thing to me, and I really want it because I feel like it's better for my family and everyone concerned, what I find out many times is what I think is right is not. And when God's will is done, that's when we figure out, okay, you know what? He was right all the time. What he said and what he wanted and what was his will was what was best for me. I just couldn't see it at the time. But that's called faith and trust. And we have to have that in order for us to increase our faith. So what's the answer to keeping our faith strong? And I'll end with this. I'm out of time. What helps our faith grow? So in other words, if we think, well, I might have faith the size of a mustard seed, but I need to grow it, and I know that, I want you to think about the Word. First, get into the Word daily. What am I talking about? Get into the Bible. Read it every day. Familiarize yourself with it. Learn from it. Memorize things in it. Write things down and put them somewhere where you can see them so that every time you pass it, you're looking at it and you're thinking about it. Get yourself in the Word. That's one way to increase your faith because you'll see how true the Word is. Okay, another way is to pray. Pray daily. That's just becoming closer to your Lord, to your God. That's just talking to them like they're your closest friends, because guess what? They are. Okay, prayer. After you think about being closer to God, loving God, including Him in everything that's going on in your day, telling Him, I can't do this without you, Lord, but with you all things are possible. That's going to start your day off differently. Another thing is to fellowship. And fellowship is what I'm talking about right now. When we get up and we get ourselves ready and we go down to church and we sit with like Christians and we read and we learn and we listen, guys, it's an encouragement to sit with other Christians, to talk to them, to hear from them, to have their faith exposed to you. It makes you stronger. And also, being with like Christians is going to make you more accountable, because you're going to think of things, you're going to see things, you're going to hear things that are going to help you better understand how you need to live a Christian life. And the last thing that we need to do to increase our faith, or probably not the last thing, but the last thing I have written down, is that we need to be obedient. And Jesus warns us. If you will turn over to Matthew 7:21 through 23, He's going to tell you there that the people who are going to go to heaven, the ones that are going to enter the kingdom of heaven, are going to be the ones who do the will of His Father who is in heaven. So you have to live a life of obedience. It's very clear there, because He also goes on and says, all who cry out to me, Lord, Lord, will not enter into the kingdom of heaven. In other words, if you've been told all your life that all you have to do is just say, oh, I believe, because that's what John 3:16 says. If you've been told that all your life, that that's all you need is just to have that ready answer when you stand before God and say, I believe, Jesus tells you right here that unless you do the will of my Father who is in heaven, then you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. So we need to think about obedience. We need to think about coming together as a church group and to fellowship together. We need to think about daily prayer, and we need to think about getting into the Word every day. Those things will definitely improve your faith walk. Okay. Have a great Sunday. I hope I see you in Sunday school today. And I know Jeremy will have a great lesson. So I'll talk to you later. I'll see you later. I love you guys.